Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the last session of this afternoon. As you take your seat, calmly and quietly, you get ready to enjoy the last presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Marta Bertolaso is full professor of philosophy of science and human development at the Faculty of Science and Technology for Humans and the Environment at the Università Campus Biomedico di Roma in Italy. She is head of the research unit in philosophy of science and human development. Her research spans between philosophy of the life sciences, scientific practice, epistemology, ethics, and the philosophy of complex organized systems. Her current work focuses on an integral understanding of development and adaptive dynamics in living systems, as well as on the notions of progress, human labor, and soft control in management in light of the new AI technologies. Just let me mention a couple of titles from a long list of publications. I'll start with the book How Science Works, Choosing Levels of Explanation in Biological Science from 2013. Then perhaps her most famous book to date, Philosophy of Cancer, Dynamic of Relation and Relational View of 2016. And then she co-authored Umanesimo Tecnologico, una riflessione filosofica sull'AI, 2024. And also from last year, another book, Le questioni aperte della vita, epistemologia della complessità. She's presenting a paper which goes by the title Towards an Integral Relational Framework for Food, Well-being, and Hospitality. As previously, you have 50 minutes and 10 minutes or 15 for the open discussion. Professor Marta Bertolaso, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I hope to stop in 45 minutes because I'm really interested in the discussion. Also after the beautiful sessions we had this morning and this afternoon, thank you again for the last presentation. I'll try to build on what we have already listened as far as possible, given the slides. You see the constraints of that slides sometimes also. So, before sharing the outline now of the presentation, I think it's important, at least useful, to make explicit the viewpoint I'm moving from, right? Which is also for this talk, the perspective of science in practice. When we think of scientific practice, we don't only think of the scientific conclusions or what we call scientific evidences, but we also think of praxis, style, methods, which are, and I hope nobody will be surprised by this claim, which are very strictly linked to cultural issues, to philosophical issues, and even to what I have been calling a social epistemic mandate. And this will be part of my thesis in this presentation, and also part of the argument, right? To move beyond the kind of tensions we are suffering in the daily topic. And clearly, food is an interesting example, right? In this think of scenarios, right? In which we can just listen, right? Depending on the culture of the framework, we have in mind the images, we have in mind the weather, we experiment, we suffer or enjoy every day. The way we conceive the terms like nutrients, like relationship, like procedures, praxis, cultural factors changing, right? So I think this is important to keep in mind, not to think that science is like a neutral word in which the evidence is the last word about, not even about science itself. So this is a strong claim, but I think it's important to... So, to start with the most recent science, it's not already science, but it will get that ranking. I have asked artificial intelligence about food, okay? So the first slides are by artificial intelligence. I used Perplexity, so anytime in the next slides you will see that logo is Perplexity. So it's not me, it's not Professor Fabris. It's artificial intelligence, right? So as we can see, and clearly the question is done from thank you, to avoid, is clearly an artificial intelligence working with European, Anglo-Saxon, American, US background data. Clearly, and that was interesting to me. Because as you can see, food is defined as any substance. So food is a substance to provide nutrients and so on. Blah blah blah. Okay, what we can read here. Food is essential for growth, health, and survival. It also plays an important role in culture, social interactions, and personal enjoyment. Okay? This is something we find all the time, and all the definitions I have been able to find out in the web precisely show this kind of tension. From an epistemic point of view, for me, it is a tension, right, between the food understood in terms of something, nutrients, and food understood in terms of cultural criteria, for example, or social interactions, right? So to me the question was, is there something in common? Should we understand food in a different way in order to combine, to make sense of what is actually real life in the history, in our also in our daily experience, right? So as you can see, right, artificial intelligence give me a huge endorsement saying epistemology of food is an interesting topic. So I move forward looking at this kind of questions. What is food? What epistemic mandate, specific understanding of food reflects? And the working hypothesis I have been working on to prepare and to organize things that have been already published. Everything is already published. But for today was this, right? The working hypothesis that the modern rationalist idea of food and well-being, not only of food, but it's also interesting, well-being, affect our understanding of what the act of eating together implies and entails, and justifies from an epistemological point of view tensions that emerge when discussing about food ethics. The next part of the slide is precisely about food ethics from perplexity, from artificial intelligence. So this is already an open question for philosophers here, right? Because I do have a problem with this definition. Why? Food ethics examines the moral principles and values associated with food production, distribution, consumption. It explores the ethical implication of our food choices, considering factors, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, it's about making conscious food decisions. So my first reaction was, we are already assuming that we do have food, right? And that food is a right. As a nutrient or all the things that we have. So this is an open question for philosophers, moral philosophers here in the room. I go back. So given this premise, methodological and framework premises, the outline is like a journey, actually. So where we are, right? The first point is clearly a focus on what have been called in literature the Great Acceleration. Rosa, also Alfredo Marcos, and many others, Professor Fabris, definitely also, many philosophers, right, around the world in the last decades talked about this kind of process, clearly characterized by this process of automation. Automation is fine. I'm teaching and working with the engineers all the time, so clearly automation is a goal, a fair goal, but with automation something happens, right? And mainly for the purpose of this talk, the point is that what we have been inheriting from automation is a very specific understanding of science in the first place. So a successful scientific result is a result able to automatize processes, so moving faster, reaching everybody, and being able to do this on our own, because that's precisely the objective of automation, right? So these are the 4 A's, what we call the 4 A's: automation, acceleration, accessibility, and also autonomy. But we do have a problem with autonomy, as we to some extent also already heard this morning, right? Because this notion of autonomy is clearly an individualistic autonomy, is an auto-referential autonomy. So that automation and that process, right, of moving beyond and faster, at the end of the day, is projecting in our daily life, in our culture, so in our way of thinking of things, of the value of things, to go faster, and to go to some extent alone. I don't need the others, because I can automatize processes, right? And that's part. So we have been talking in terms of human rights, of autonomy all the time, Kant, and since then always, right, in the European document at least. But we are not aware enough, I think, at least in my opinion, of the kind of cultural philosophical, what we have inherited, right? What is part of the background and the bias, which is this kind of objective, definitive, automatized, individualistic, which is good for some things, clearly, and history teaches, but not for everything, and clearly not for food, well-being, and hospitality, as we will see. So, authors, this is another colleague working with Professor Fabris and me in the project we are working on relational notions of food. He says, quoting Rosa, the modern subject was set free to search for her or his own meaning and purpose, right? We do not need to confront, we do not need to discuss, we do not need others or societies in order to. With the risk of simplifying Rosa, blah, blah, can lead to lifestyles and life orientation that are intrinsically alienating. One may not feel confident to know one's meaning and purpose in life yet, and then in the meantime one engages in a project of maximizing one's wealth and health so as to be well provided when one finally is able to know one's purpose. This modern subject is of course also an excellent consumer, as we saw this morning. She or he is more than willing to spend attention and money on goods and services that support and enhance health and well-being, comfort and beauty. So this kind, I think that these terms of optimization, maximization, functional objectives, instrumental meaning of things and relationship is part of our culture, of the Occidental culture. For sure, and we suffer the consequences. We end up in this kind of scenarios, right? And the digital tools tend to homogenize even more than just automation, right? Our relationship, our desires, our expectations with respect to different things And we end up with this that alone together is what has been written also in literature, quite often related with a sort of collective anxiety, because we are never able to reach those final, the question I was asking this morning, right? We are projecting goals, global goals that are never here, never part of my real life, right? So in this sense, happiness is a final goal I won't reach at any time, at the end of the day and of my life. And that's justified, right, in studies and in many reading of these evidences, the sense of frustration of our contemporary society. This is one of the epidemic of loneliness, right, and isolation after the pandemic COVID. So if you look at our society, we start from pathologies, quite often we understand better physiology looking at the pathology, right? It's clearly a society in which people usually or often at least easily, eat alone. People suffer from excess of food or lack of it, but because of a choice. Not because there is a real lack of food, right? People waste food. Somebody was precisely making this point earlier. People mistreat food and their bodies with the food. When we think of food and food ethics in the contemporary modern Occidental society, we can say, right, and state that food is considered mainly a thing. Food ethics becomes a problem of choice of food which is already available, or a process of production, also what was mentioned in the previous. And food cultural meaning is like an addendum, right? But there is also this aspect, and nobody is actually entering in how we got there. Briefly, objectification, individualism, and materialism. This is not clearly new, but what I'm interested in is in the consequences for our understanding of food and food relationships. Okay. Anytime, at least in my university, right, I teach ethics, nutrition ethics, or other sustainability, human ecology, and so on. People in the street usually, anytime you see a picture like this, you think, okay, it's fine, that's my society, right? That's my daily life. We talk about nutrients, we talk about pills we can take in substitution of, like it were the same thing, yeah? And so on. And we underestimate, I think, the ecological problems we are creating and facing when, and from an anthropological point of view, the payoff, right, the outcome, the result is this one. The answer to the question, am I well, was to be found in medical diagnostic practices. The answer to what should I eat was to be found in nutrition science, expecting the exact diet for me in terms of nutrients, right? Hence, the modern subject becomes a sort of entity, a mind, a question mark, that has a body that should be an object of self-governance. Also, this idea of self-governance, I think, is important. This process, food is increasingly reframed as nutrition, a science, as you can see, right? As can be witnessed in an European North, blah, blah. Eating is reframed as individual acts of governance of the body, and not of the person, as we listened and we heard in the previous presentation this afternoon. So, in this cultural background, the good consists in the thank you, okay, and protection of the individual. In his ever greater liberation from intermediate bodies and from institutions, and in his biological health. Materialism follows as a mere understanding of transcendence as vertical, religious mainly. The only possible standard is materialism, like in science we saw, right? Because physicalism, the consequence of empiricism was physicalism. And we cannot understand complex diseases within that framework, but that's a topic for another discussion. What is important for us today, I think, is this, what has been defined, the institutionalization of solitude, which is a very strong statement, but very true. Aging in many traditions means having been able to equip oneself with durable goods that can be passed on. Modern, but above all, postmodern thought requires an institutionalization of solitude through a disconnection of ties. So that's an important point, because it brings to some consequences and even paradoxes that from an epistemological point of view are always very interesting, because when you have a paradox, you have hope to make some new, right, thoughts and reflections. I think, just to give examples, right, you can read that list, but I think that here, I guess, like in Italy, you go to the supermarket and the bread, the most expensive bread, is not the most nutrient. Precisely the opposite, right? If you think of the war, the Second World War, our grandparents, right, or parents, said that we were looking for the white bread. And now the white bread is for everybody. And it's the black bread, right, which is much more expensive. So there is a heavy cultural reason, right, background along differences, and this is also interesting, right, even relations becomes things, mere interactions. Something I can find in internet, for example. I can buy or I can sell. Differences are no further tolerated. They constitute a threat to the universality. If we don't understand well, we were talking yesterday in the evening with Professor Fabris, with Adriano, about this, what we are thinking in terms of universality, which in my understanding is about foundations, is not about generalizations or abstractions. However, because life is life, and then life helps, we see in daily life, in the crisis of our societies, in the consequences, that owning is different from being, that there are context dependencies that become a problem, also for the scientific inquiry, for our understanding of scientific evidences related with food. Rationalist abstraction is a chimera or a utopia. Isolation, loneliness, uncertainty become a problem. And to me, this is mainly related, this is the bottom line, right, of the presentation, with this epistemological crisis, which is related with the sense and value of limits. So the tensions that limits create are good. This is part of the statement and part of the thesis, right? We can understand, and I won't have time to enter into the details, but if you are familiar with the complex sciences, it's different using terms like limits or boundaries or constraints. I will mainly use constraints for today, but and it's probably enough. The point here is that my answer to your question this morning about rights and duties is that we should go back to a different relational understanding of personal responsibility. And I go back to this point. But let's see some ideas from the biblical wisdom, right? What we can learn if we look having this kind of tensions, problems, right? Even epistemological problems in mind, reading the Bible. I'm not a theologian. I grew up in a Catholic environment, and I'm used to go to Mass, and so I'm used to listen, right, to the readings. And during the last month also, I was listening, right, and thinking about some aspects that I consider very interesting, right? We probably all know the story of Abraham and the three visitors, right? In this case, we have Abraham sitting and waiting out of his home with Sarah, his wife, right? And three guys arrived and asked him for food. And he asked Sarah to prepare food. Interestingly, he prepared meat and milk, something that in that tradition never go together. So this is very interesting. And this kind of episodes, anecdote stories, real stories in the Bible are usually linked to an announcement. There is a birth. There is something happening in terms of somebody coming. And for these reasons, to me, highlights, right, of this story, this idea, notion of hospitality to strangers and foreigners, God's faithfulness to His promises when you open your doors, you open your home. Hospitality comes first, then social laws, as we saw, right? And you also mentioned in your presentation. Similarly, in this story, we see something very similar, and in this case, we have a widow offering her last meal to the prophet. And also in this case, we have an announcement. Also in this case, we have somebody going beyond laws. In this case, is a law of survival for opening doors. In order to open lessons, again, hospitality, faith in God. Hospitality comes first, beyond the geographical and the cultural boundaries. Similarly, we already said something, learned something, so I won't spend more time on this, but also in the New Testament we find something very similar. An added element here that I will stress later on is that in the New Testament it's clear that the food follow a process of transformation all the time. We bring something from the nature, that material is transformed in food. We don't eat directly that fruit, we drink wine, okay, and so on. So, and in the Eucharist, we see also that we are transformed. There is another level, right? Another understanding of transformation because of eating something or somebody. It's this is stronger, but this is, in my opinion, interesting. So, common features could be summarized like follows, right? Food from earth, transform and nurture. Not only physically, but also culturally and spiritually, from a spiritual point of view. And these three dimensions are important. In all the stories, in all the anecdotes, we see these three dimensions. We see somebody acknowledging her own origins, but also the origins of the others and the common origin. We are human beings. So I want to open my doors. Human work is needed. Human work is needed. There is a process of transformation. And there is a newborn. There is a future. There is a culture coming out of that gift, of that behavior, of that relationship. So multiplication out of donation, gift, gratuity, food to nurture, food is transformed, and this sense of belonging, welcoming to a community, a home, a family. These are, in my opinion, the way out. So once, okay, wisdom from the Bible and our daily tension, philosophical questions, the way out. Clearly, I don't think that perplexity and artificial intelligence helps. Good news for philosophers. So we still have work. When you ask perplexity about hospitality, the outcome is this kind of image and this kind of highlights. The wider understanding of hospitality is sharing cultural traditions, which is not my understanding of hospitality. Hospitality, in my understanding, implies work, and to me this is really important, human work, because if you think of the question of what is up to human work which is not possible for machines, right? My answer is here, is precisely within this framework. Food transformation, gift for nourishing, and the flourishing of both. The gift is not only for the person receiving the meal, the bread, the wine, but is also for me. I have a right to give you a gift, to open up my heart, to open my home. Hospitality comes first, means also that well-being should be understood differently, and the human flourishing is not related with a mere owning of things and a material, physical passing on of things. Think of tensions in the families nowadays, right, for things, and instead of relationships. Hospitality entails work, happiness. Again, this is important. I think this is an Aristotelian understanding of happiness. But happiness is an activity, is not a future end, is here and now. What was wrong? What is wrong in our society, right? 10 minutes, right? In my reading of things, of what is actually going on, is that automation and even more digitalization, so the media as we conceive them, especially our children conceive media, right, in our society, place in time were coupled. In the kitchen you were used to cook, and so on. Home, in the mind of my grandparents, was hospitality. I grew up with this idea, being proud to be able to have the possibility, grateful to have the possibility to open my home, to invite my friends at home. Think how it's different now, and nowadays with our children, right? They rely on social networks and so on. And this is even more interesting from a philosophical point of view, right? This gap between human work and hospitality, and the other way around, hospitality and human work, belonging, the sense of belonging, and the notion of home, care, and the idea of human dignity. What is in the process and the action of care, of caring, which is typically human. And we have been working during the last almost 8 years now on this epistemology of home. To simplify, the idea is that in the very notion of home, so in the philosophical understanding of home, we precisely have for all the cultures, and this is an empirical data, because we have been working with very different countries and traditions. When you say to a human being home, everybody understands, right? The same thing. Home does not need a house. Home is not a material concept. Home is about relationships. And not just a relationship in a general sense. So this is my answer to what kind of relationship, what kind of interdependencies we are looking at when talking about these topics. And the answer is also driven from what we learned from the development of the organism. Why we have those dimensions we mentioned earlier, talking about the Bible, here in a very schematic way, right? The by doing, the by origin, and the by holding dimension. In this paper, we applied in business ethics also this concept, but mainly the idea is that by origin, we all come from somebody else. We are children of somebody, by definition, okay? So there is also a biological origin. There is a by doing, that work, human work to transform things in service of others and for the personal survival. And there is this by holding, which is the most interesting, no time today to expand on this, the most interesting because this is related with values, with languages, with laws, with those material or no material features of what we call home, which is our own identity, which is our own traditions, which is our own biography. We humans use pictures, right? In the iPhone, at home, we need those points of reference. They remember who we are. And these are constraints. So here we can see again these coupled constraints at work. In some sense, we can say with another philosopher, Maria Pia Chirinos, she worked a lot on this topic. She says, maybe I'm quoting, maybe here is the turning point to discover that the notion of a limit could be understood as concerning the notion of need and good. So in some sense, I'm challenging the sense we have been using the term need today, right? And in my reading, we should rethink and use differently the term need to address human needs that can be fulfilled also through things, but not because of that specific thing or that specific food, but because of the relationship that specific food embodies or entails, right? From a logic point of view, from a metaphysical point of view, and from a very practical and pragmatic point of view. Okay, so again, Maria Pia Chirinos, our bodily condition is not abstract but concrete and alive. So space and time is important, right? Coupling of space and time. Wherever we perceive a human need, there is an opportunity for care. Human need recalls fragility, and fragility recalls another notion that was forbidden from the Enlightenment: dependence. Dependence has a negative perception in our culture, and again, I think we should reconsider that without links, without dependencies, we cannot even survive. So there is an identitarian value in dependencies, right? And those interdependencies, that coupling of processes is even more interesting, but again, not time for today. So future autonomous being, fine, but with others, right? So fragility, dependency, and we learn this at home. We learn to be that we are allowed to be fragile at home. And when this doesn't happen, people, children, societies do have a problem, as we can see from all the social sciences and political issues we are dealing with. Caring, this is a quote from one of our publications, caring can be considered the ethical complement of our spatial-temporal ontology. We cannot forget right, both. I would say that we are a spatial-temporal. So epistemology of limits, to me, is from an epistemological point of view, philosophical point of view, an alternative to abstraction and generalization of those tensions, right, that follows the Enlightenment or the processes we looked at earlier. And of course, we can hope for a different science. Which is important because science nowadays can be a problem if promises final evidences or answer to human questions. Right? But this is a trend. I think that policymakers usually ask, and this is the other project, right? The other papers we have been working on in the project with Adriano, the policymaker ask science for evidences to support political decisions. But this cannot be, simply because there is a huge uncertainty, technical term uncertainty, indeterminacy in the natural, real living world, even more in human beings, you cannot control. Simply you cannot control. These are good news because we have to develop a new science for complex system and so on. Work in progress. Some morals, and I will stop here. From a scientific point of view, we can say and think of food as in relational terms. Technically, now we are calling food as a biodynamic interface between the nature and the individuals and the communities also. From an anthropological point of view, hospitality should be understood in terms of action, unerrant action. That notion of action I have in mind. Well-being not related to the possibility of consumption, having more possibilities, but relationship and love, not about overcoming limits, but about nurturing constraints. From an ethical point of view, food ethics, not about economic transactions, but about affective interactions. And that's it. And, thank you very much.